Hey guys, it's Joel from guntoter.org. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be continuing our discussion on communications. Now, in our last video, we talked a little bit about why communications is such an important part of preparedness, and we also talked a little bit about why radios are kind of the key feature of communication in disasters. So on that theme, what we're going to discuss today is a little bit about some of the non-amateur services that you can use as you are kind of setting up your communications plan. Now, before we get into that, if you could go down in the corner, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and go down into the description, check out our Patreon page. It'd be really awesome if you could help us out. Everything that we do here, all the reviews we do, we buy all this gear, and we do that because we want to make sure you get the most bias-free reviews possible. And so we buy everything, we don't get anything for free. And if you can help us out on our Patreon page, that would be awesome. So with all that said, let's talk a little bit about some of the available radio services. We are going to talk about the amateur radio or ham radio kind of at the end, but we're going to talk about some of the other stuff first. And the reason we're going to talk about the other stuff first is because the vast majority of it either is license free, or if it requires a license, it's just paying of a fee, right? There's no test required to actually get the license for that particular service. And the reason that I think it's important to talk about these, because generally speaking, they are not going to be as good as amateur radio in a disaster scenario, in my opinion. But I think it's important to talk about them because I think it is unrealistic to expect every member of a mutual aid group or a preparedness collective or whatever to have their amateur radio license. Now, a lot of people disagree with me, right? Because technician is not very hard to get. It's not very expensive. I have my technician license. But realistically speaking, it is still time, and it is still effort, and it is still money that, depending on where you live, where I live, there's a ham radio club. They teach classes and they give the test regularly. It's easy for me to get a license. It really is. Other places, it may not be as easy. So for you to set up your whole comms plan around amateur radio and just say, well, if you haven't got your license, you're not going to be talking, is kind of a little foolhardy. In addition, there's the possibility that you could have people showing up, maybe people who are kind of more peripheral in your group, that maybe they weren't really involved in a lot of stuff, but they knew you guys existed. Well, when the disaster hits, they do have skills and they want to put them to use, but since they haven't really been into the preparedness mindset or lifestyle ahead of time, they didn't get the license. Well, to say, all right, well, you know what, you're not going to have a radio just because our entire plan is set up for licensed individuals and you don't have one. Again, it's foolhardy and it's counterproductive. So that's why we're discussing all this other stuff outside of amateur radio. We will discuss amateur radio at the end, but we're going to start off with kind of the commercial, really available stuff. The most obvious one we're going to start off with is what's called the Family Radio Service, or FRS. Like, these are the radios you go to Walmart and they come in the cool little blister pack that says you're going to get 30 miles of talkie talk out of it. That's FRS. FRS is what's called UHF, ultra high frequency communication. It's in the 462 to 467 megahertz range. License free, right? You can go to Walmart, buy you a set of radios, and you can get talking. There are a number of limitations on it, though. Technically speaking, you can only talk on radios that are certified to operate on those frequencies, like the ones from Walmart. There are limitations on your power. For some frequencies, that's a half watt. For other frequencies, that's 2 watts. So combined with the fact that it's a high frequency and low power, it is going to be confined to a smaller area, which is not necessarily a bad thing. When we prepare for communications, we need to prepare kind of in concentric circles, right? We start off with ourselves and our family, or maybe our family and our team. We move to kind of team into the neighborhood, then the neighborhood community, and then community and outside the community, like other communities, the state, other states, etc. So at the smallest level, right, it's not really a bad thing. If you're just kind of pinging around your neighborhood, it's not going to be too bad. One of the big downsides, though, is that because anyone can get on FRS, anyone can go to Walmart and buy radios, after a disaster, there are probably going to be a whole lot of people who bust open that blister pack and they start talking, and now you've got the airwaves kind of cramming up with a whole bunch of people who bought these radios and now they feel like they have a chance to use them. So FRS is useful if you're just getting into kind of the preparedness thing. They're also useful as like training radios. Like if you're teaching new people, especially if you're teaching like kids love playing with radios. They're a great way to kind of teach radio etiquette and kind of get people spun up on operating a radio. You're not allowed to use repeaters on them, so you can't extend the range. And you are also not allowed to send data over FRS. So that does kind of limit, when we're looking at technologies that can kind of expand our like blue force tracking and stuff, it does kind of limit us on what we can do there. For some of that, we can solve that by going to what's called the General Mobile Radio Service, the Gmrs, or whatever you want to call it. This operates in the same frequencies as FRS, so it's not that different as far as its capabilities. Now, with that said, you are allowed to use repeaters on GMRS. You are also allowed up to 5 watts on handhelds on some of the channels for GMRS. So you are going to get a little more range out of GMRS. Now, GMRS does require a license, but it is not a testing license. Like, you don't have to go take a test. You just pay the FCC a fee, which is $70, and you get a 10-year license. And with that 10-year license, your entire immediate family can use it. So it's not like you're paying $70 for each person in your family. I have a family of 5 or 6 or whatever. I can buy the license. All 6 of us can operate under my license. You can also send data on GMRS, right? So if you want to plug, say, ATAC into a radio and send your text messages or location data, you can do that over GMRS legally. So that's kind of a neat additional thing. A lot of the Garmin Rhinos, right, that could send GPS data, that was kind of a GMRS functionality as far as I can remember. So that's kind of an additional point to GMRS. With that said, again, you are in the UHF range, although you do have more power and repeaters, so your range is going to kind of vary. For both FRS and GMRS, I know that the blister pack said you were going to get 30 miles. That's perfect world, and you're never going to get 30 miles, not without a repeater. You'd be lucky to get 5 to 10, and 10 is probably like stars and angels aligning. So understand that these are close communications, right? Neighborhood block level communications. Now, in addition to GMRS, there is also a service called the Multi-Use Radio Service, MURS. This is like a weird combination of FRS and GMRS, but in the VHF world. Kind of odd. There's only 5 channels on MURS, but again, it's in VHF. It is a lower power VHF. 2 watts is kind of what you're working with. You are not allowed to do repeaters, but you are allowed to send data. You don't need a license. So, like I said, it's kind of a weird hybrid of the rules of FRS and GMRS. But, you know, MURS is not as well known. There's your blister pack radios don't typically operate on MURS. So from a congestion standpoint, in the case of a disaster, you may be able to get on MURS, maybe have a little bit more free airspace than you would working on FRS or GMRS. Ooh, another thought on FRS and GMRS. The channels, the actual radios you buy, typically don't tell you what frequency you're talking on. It's just a channel, which may or may not align between manufacturers. Like a Midland radio and a Cobra radio channel 1 may not be the same frequency. It's the same channel, right? It's channel 1, but it's not the same frequency. So if you set them both to channel 1, you're not necessarily going to be talking to each other. So that's important to understand. If you do choose to use FRS or GMRS radios, and you're using them from different manufacturers, you're probably going to need some sort of compatibility chart as far as which channels are which frequencies, so that you can interoperate and also know how to shut off some of the weird privacy features that the different manufacturers use. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind with FRS and GMRS. MRS, again, you don't really see a lot of radios that are marketed as, hey, these are MRS radios, grab these and talk. But it is an option, it is out there, and there are radios, you can find radios that will talk on those frequencies. If you go to my blog, by the way, which is down below, I have links to like kind of quick guides that the FCC puts out, as well as the actual Code of Federal Regulations that dives into all the nitty gritty of really technical stuff as far as interference and everything else for FRS, GMRS, MRS, CB, and amateur radio. It's all in there. So check that out. I know a lot of people watch YouTube because they don't want to read blogs. Well, sorry. I've got more information in my blog because it's easier for me to put it in there. Other than MRS, right? So we've gone from UHF way up here. Now we're in VHF with MRS, and we're kind of step down into HF. So we've talked about ultra high frequency, very high frequency, and now high frequency. I'm going to throw out a name here that maybe a lot of people haven't heard in a while: CB, Citizens Band Radio. Back when I was growing up, 80s and 90s, CB was like the cool radio to have. You'd open up a mail order catalog and there'd just be pages of, really shiny, chromed out radios that you could buy. You had handhelds, you could mount them in your truck. This was cool. That was the radio I grew up wanting, was a CB radio. CB radio is technically high frequency. So in theory, with the power limits and the frequencies that you're allotted, you can reach out a little further. You can also do a little bit more technical stuff. If you watch some of the videos specifically on CB for preppers, you're going to start hearing them throw out words that normally you only hear, amateur radio guys talk about. Talking about setting up your antennas and talking about skipping off the ionosphere and all sorts of other stuff, using sidebands, upper sideband, lower sideband. There's actually a lot of capabilities within Citizens Band that I don't think a lot of people realize. In fact, a lot of it I didn't realize until I really started going out there and digging into it. Again, I'm not going to get into the super technical stuff. There are lots of guys out there that will happily talk about technical stuff all day long. Go start hunting for that stuff because it's really interesting. There's guys that say that they've gone on the sidebands and gotten 10, 15, 20 plus miles on a good day, and on great days where they can skip, they've gotten even further. So there's a lot of kind of neat capabilities that you can do with CB that you really can't do with MRS, GMRS, or FRS. Like I said, you're really kind of getting into your toe into the amateur world at that point. No license for CB. There are a bunch of rules, but let's be honest. If you know the term CB, you probably learned it watching, old 80s movies about truckers, so no one follows the rules for CB anyway. But that's something that, if you're looking to talk a little further, further certainly than you're going to get with UHF or VHF, CB is a very interesting, the CB and the HF kind of frequency is a very interesting option that you should probably investigate. Now, with all those said, right, let's discuss a little bit about ham radio. So amateur radio, or ham radio, is really, in a perfect world, right, I would love for everyone in a mutual aid group or preparedness group to be ham radio licensed. I have my technician license. It's super easy to get, but at the same time, the permissions I get as a technician are really not as expansive as people think they are, right? Like, people think you're going to get your technician's license and you're just going to be able to do everything. And while there is a lot that you're going to be able to do, and you're certainly going to gain a lot of knowledge in the pursuit of your license, which to me is probably the most valuable thing you're going to get out of a technician license, is the knowledge that you're going to have to gain to get there. But your technician license is very limited. If you are looking for a communications guru for your group, realistically, you're going to be looking at a amateur radio operator, general or higher, general or extra. Because when you start getting into the general and extra, that's when you start getting those long range capabilities. When you get into the extra, I mean, the world is your oyster, all that fun stuff. You're hitting satellites and sending data and just doing all sorts of cool stuff. But I recommend that every group have someone who is in that general or extra class. But I also recommend that we take a very realistic look and understand that for the rest of the group, the end users who are not going to be your communications experts, you need to have ways of communicating that don't require the amateur license. And before somebody says it, I know somebody's going to say it, well, in an emergency, you don't need a license, you can just communicate. Yes, that is true. When it is safety of life, you can use any band basically to communicate that. With that said, communications is kind of like guns, right? You don't want to be the first time you pick up a gun to be the time you're being attacked. You don't want the first time you pick up a radio to be the time you actually need to talk on it. You need to communicate beforehand. You need to practice. You need to set up your comms plan. You need to find out what the limitations of your radio are. And if you're not going to have people that are licensed on the ham bands, you've got to use one of these other services to set up that plan and to get that practice in. Because if you do not practice, I guarantee you, when the time comes, your comms are going to suck. And if your comms suck, it's going to impede your ability to respond and to actually make a difference when you need to. So, yes, amateur radio is the best option to me. It's just my opinion, it's the best option. But there are lots of other options that if you were judicious, right, and you plan ahead and practice, you can make those work for you. So just keep those in mind. With that said, we've kind of covered the vast majority of our background. If you are really interested in ham radio stuff, or if you just want maybe some more definitions on some of the terms I used today with the frequency and hertz and megahertz and HF, UHF, VHF, I've attached a video up in the corner. It's about 30 minutes long. It's a bit dry, but it's good. It's a lot of good information. So if you want kind of a dive into the technical stuff, go check that out. If you're interested in getting your ham radio license, if you really want to get into that, I recommend a guy who goes by Ham Radio Crash Course. Again, channel up in the corner. Really good stuff. He makes great videos and he covers just a wide range of stuff, but he has a whole video series on kind of setting up an emergency comms kit and also getting your license and stuff. It's very useful. As we move on in this series, I guarantee you're going to hear me reference some of his videos. So go check that out. Get your learn on, and get your nerd on too, because that's kind of fun. So anyway, I hope this was useful for you. I realize this is not nearly as exciting as a gear video talking about pouches and carriers and all other stuff. We are going to get back into gear in upcoming videos. But I really wanted to kind of talk about this. It's showing up more and more. People are realizing how important comms is. And so I wanted to get kind of just enough information out there that people can start thinking about it and kind of start doing their own research, so at least they know the words that they're looking for when you go out and hit up YouTube or Google or whatever. So thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. Without you guys watching, I'm just a random dude on the internet. And that's no fun. So if you have comments, questions, go down below, hit me up. I do read, I do respond. I will tell you right now, if you start asking me really technical comms questions, I'm probably going to refer you somewhere else, because I do not have a lot of that technical knowledge. I am an end user. I'm not your comms guy. For those of you who are familiar with like a special forces team, I'm not your echo. All right, I'm just the guy at the bottom of the pile. But I'll try to find an echo to refer you to. So please feel free. I do read them, I do respond, and I love interacting. Also, again, if you go down in the corner, like, share, subscribe. If you go down, check out our Patreon and help us out, that would be awesome. And I hope to see you all again next time.